Um, We were bored, so we stayed. The days knocked deep into other days. A glacialness set in, and life kept pace with the dried fruit in the jar. Brushed steel gave back our pissed-off bits, our doubled selves so drained of disguise, we forgot where it was we were hoping to go, holed up all summer in a corner so dark you'd half expect bison chalked on a K-face every time we catched a light. It was the kind of place where morning fell for everyone but harder for some, where bad decisions were lived counterclockwise and endlessly refitted to finish up flush, where afternoons were a gradual squander of sobriety, shot glasses lamped with whiskey on cue, and empties where the crags of a quandary drunkenness clung to. Tables where, outside the shrieking reach of the talkers, can't sleep stayed, and night shifters cooled their heels, attended by soul tools, cell phone, lighter, cigarette. Nights of middle-aged men enduring middle-aged men in their cups, buying rounds, half-cusped on high stools. Sun-up found a few run aground, up-shouldered hulls, while our own lives were an endless keel scrape where the pluperfect errand was the errand always deferred. A kind of time travel, I guess. We sat back and watched the future screen its cliches of us, those besuited and briefcased, with their died and gone to heaven whistle when handed a pint, those done to a turn divorcees in duffel coat and boots, wine-sipping casualties of the wife wars, those who, smashed, stand too suddenly slewing into you, and those who, if you join uninvited. Next Door Cafe is an actual bar in Park X where my wife and I lived for several years, and which was once known as the poorest postal code in the country. And a block over from Next Door Cafe was our butcher. Well, we used to call it our butcher, but we bought our meat at Loblaws. But if we would buy our meat at a butcher, this would be the guy. Our butcher. I could bone up, be the right man for that one-man job, hang by its hocks a rabbit shucked from the jacket of its black bristled fur and still talking and twitches. As well, I might grasp the particular way he swings a cleaver, brings it down on a neck like a primitive. More to the point, I'd learn to move the beak of my blade into the fragrance of a flank, or browse apart a chest's cardiac leafage, my white apron a blotchwork of blood. I'd like to pickle ox tongue and pig feet, screw lids on sheep tripe and calf brain, set out jars like indices to carcasses unpacked like suitcases, striated and plush, cruel worked with fat and grow-grained with gristle. Meat is not semblance, meat is baroque. That said, I'd love to break back the pages of a shank and read all day tales about the flex and kick, the squawk and gack of things and pens, grass-nipping goats, had-been hens, hogs which nuzzled mud and snorkeled its odors until their plug was pulled and the spinning gears stilled the small organs, organs I'd like to disinter and wrap, risen again inside the pink of new paper skin. The book is set in various places my wife and I, Jennifer, lived over the last 6 years, 7 years. It's not, I mean, so in a sense it's a travel book. I mean, it's a book about the places we travel to, but it's also, I would say, an anti-travel book because the poems are meant to be lived, or written out of a lived-in sense of the place. And one of the places we lived in for 6 months was Rome. And when I was there, quite predictably, I got obsessed with gladiators. And read as much as I could about them, imagined what it must be like, what it must have been like to be a gladiator, and wondered if any of them, sort of wanted to leave showbiz ever. And of course, they never did. There was no leaving it, other than suicide. There's just no way you would leave. They died, quite young. But nonetheless, I dreamed or imagined a gladiator named Pugnax, which was a favorite sort of stage name at the time, handing in his papers, his notice. Pugnax gives notice. He's done with it. The tridents and tigers, the manager's greed, the sumptuous beds of noble women who please their own moods. He's done with dogging it for the crowds, the stabbing, the slashing, the strangling, the poor pay, the chintzy palm branch prizes. Make no mistake, Pugnax is a real fierceosaurus, winner of 26 matches, a forum favorite. Yet his yob genes have, it seems, gone quiet. Fatigue has called his soul back to his body, circles under his eyes. He sleeps badly. Late night cigs lit from the dog end of the last cutwork of the clock, nibbling him small. In the barracks around him, his friends snore, lucky returnees of the last hard hacking. Dead to the world, free of a weapon and the fist. Priscus face down in the crook of his arm, Dryamphus flung open, caught on a bad turn. Virus collapsed, whacked against the cot. Flamma, doomed by down-thumbing shadows, lies in a stain of his final shape and size. Pugnax loves them all. Chasers and net fighters, fishmen and javelin throwers, carefree despite punishing practices, screaming orders, despite limbs trained to turn lethal for mobs, unable to bear the thought of two men clinging to life. But here it's only the thock of wooden sword against wooden sword, the racket as they fall on each other's shields in joy. Pugnax's heart breaks for them. Understand he has inflicted pain and felt pain, but now wants to go native, move into a flat, experiment with fashionable clothes, dawdle at the baths, tame his nights with tea, be spellbound by the smell of soap, find a wife. Our boy dreams of joining the crowd, shouting himself hoarse as some bonehead gets knocked down, the blade pushed through his chest, stapling him to the ground. At intermission, he'll watch as the blood is raked over with sand, thinking chore thoughts, yard work, paint jobs, weekend projects. You will know you have made it as a poet if, when on tour, your publisher puts you up in a hotel, and you're not sort of kipping on a sofa or wandering the streets. So on the tour for my previous book, I was in St. John at the Delta Hotel, and it is. I mean, and I assume this happens to everyone who stays at these sorts of hotels. But invariably, when I'm there, there's always a convention, a business convention. So, and I always thought it was sort of an odd twinning of the fates, that sort of the professional paupers are there with, like, these businessmen, sort of the paupers of the world with the professionals of the world. So at the Delta Hotel when I was there, this happened. Delta Hotel, St. John. What kind of boys are these? Sucker punch boys, headlock boys, lunch heist boys, wedgie boys, boys with heavy rumps, interred pecs, and belts that pay out paunches. Add one-syllable, hand-gripping names. Add blackberries and the latest learned terms. Client-led cascading process. New kinds of lock-in. In the lobby, like an airport lounge between time zones, I spot myself. Dark tip-top suit gone to seed, blue dress shirt, leather lace-ups, and, as he walks by, the oversweet body heat smell of cologne. I know all about the cradle-to-grave schlep his life has become, days when fluorescent lit is as visionary as it gets. His love of winning, and the way winning flees from his love for it. the 3-color business cards he hoped would finally bring him into his own, his wife's voice forever blinking on the hotel room phone, a view that's nothing to email home about. I trail him into the stalls, stand shoulder to shoulder as we share a pee. His good tie knotted crisply back in 2003. He washes his hands, stares a spell in the mirror, bluffing himself, watching for tells. Um, 2002, 2003, I was in Wyoming for several weeks, and there visited or was brought to a junkyard, which was the first time I'd ever seen something like that. And it was vast. And 2 thoughts occurred to me. I was visiting Wyoming at a particularly low point in my life, and 2 thoughts occurred to me. One, that how extraordinary it is when something like metal or stone decays. It seems to sort of mineralize, as if the appearance is as if something that was once alive. And the other thing is how easy it is to imagine that the world sort of mirrors what we feel. So that what you see seems to sort of be an expression of how we feel. And how easy it is to write poems that do that. So this is called Junkyard. Or how easy it is to write poems to sort of capture that sense that the world is giving back to you what you feel. Junkyard. Owning nothing, there is, I see today, a touch of those cars about my life. A touch of decay in that flotsam of chrome I recognize, demanding a new curiosity, a new eye to roam chalk-lifted hatchbacks and overturned trucks, vans crushed and strewn on cinder blocks, all that automotive cartilage and bone, the mounting lugs, drive shafts and valves, that high-rise of mess, that pile gagging on its own size. And then to have the clutter just sit there, so big you feel really bad for the ground bearing the grunt of it, scattered and busted, dismantled, maxed out, everything allowed its 100th freefall into flaw, leather seats with rips whooping open on white fluff grins, kicked-in windshields, gutted engines, and hoods sporting splatter patterns of corrosion as bright as blood. Then there's the flacking of mud, and color here nothing more than the crash of tinctures. And the surfaces? Oh, fish-scaled, or brindled, or grease-charred, or scratched like Arabic scribble. Paint the tint of fruit sickened with rot, dense exfoliate pinpricks of umber that crust lichen thick, or ochre hemorrhaging up through some scraped-off yellow. Then the ground freaked with patches of oil, and, tree-like, a tall stack of tires, black-barked with treads. The air tastes of it, whatever it is that stains the hubcap's bowlful of rain. And from deep inside that heap, part Hieronymus Bosch, part Mad Max, you can hear the ticking of some fragment, expanding as it loses its last faint bloom of warmth. Look, all these scummy windows reply with a version of myself, peeking into smudge-lit interiors at erstwhile dashboards prinked with accessories. And imagine the 70 Pontiac motoring off in an open road afterlife. Unless, of course, this is it. Unless erosion as a category of endurance, unloved and unlovely, and the hereafter is simply what remains when you're left with what survives its subtraction. And what's left is always some old, odd, scotched part, iron-grey chassis, gashed grille, door frayed off its hinges. Better yet, you'd think all this would foul the sunny spring day, but this junk has lived here so long beside the half-darkened wood, it's now one more disbursement of nature, the weather taking metal back to its first motive, becoming a new growth, a small rust blessing. I have to be straight with you and say that like to iron. I do. And have you written a poem about it? Here it is. Song of the House Husband. Cherish it most when it steams. Steam, though, fails to praise its seethe of vapor, or propped upright, the suspirating hush as it catches its breath. Flanks like the shins of a ship or open halves of a muscle, and on its brow the spirit level's impressionable bubble. Fructifying flatness, it takes my trousers' frown, gives back pleats, takes my tired tucked-in shirt, makes it newly dapper, and really nothing's like the hiss of its hull kissing a dampened dent, releasing that rich roadside scent of rain on dust. Hope for the linens freckled with folds, hope for the crimped, the crumpled, the crinkled, the crushed, hope for the ripple, the ruffled, the rumpled, the rucked. O coffer of creaselessness, I do not know how to cut a straight furrow. I do not know how to drive a batch of nails. But grip your handle as I would a spade, your heft the heft of a hammer. Rod mentioned a poem that I'm going to read now about my father. And the idea for this poem came out of a conversation that I had with some writers. We were sort of, I was at a writer's retreat in Virginia. And usually at these retreats or colonies, you're there with 15, 20 writers, and there's nothing to do. I mean, it's just you're often on some big tract of land, and you're between going to the studio and going to your room and and eating. You have each other to talk to or sleep with. I don't know. And so invariably, there's some very interesting conversations occur, and someone asked the question once, when was the first time you discovered the idea of luck? So when was the first time you learned that good things can happen to you which you don't deserve, for which you had not prepared for, planned for, or worked for? And of course, the incredible thing is that once they do happen, you feel as though they were meant for you and you do deserve them. And so everyone sort of, we went around, the question went around and everyone answered. And when it was my turn, I realized, with this amazing clarity that rarely happens to me, that I could either tell the story or write the poem. So I sort of mumbled something, and I went back to my room and wrote this down. I worked on it after this, but it was, I started it then. I'm not one of those poets who sort of whips these things off.
You're not?
No, unfortunately. All right, it's called Lucky Me. Luck for me began at 3, with the hands my father drew behind him, and between them traded a quarter, a candy, a stick of Trident. Whatever he could fish up from his pockets, nights when I'd surprise him in the hallway, as he stumbled in after nearly 24 hours driving cab, late for dinner, and likely broke. He'd kneel, place a finger on his lips, and face flushed from the cold, coat still on, kept his eyes on mine as he bent his arms back in half Nelsons for an unseen game of catch. He appeared as though under arrest, in cuffs. This was before I learnt about the real him, the second life he led in half-lit card rooms, basements with 2 or 3 tables operating, where he sat at ease among his only peers. This was before I came across him in books, 19th century tales of titled reprobates and debauched aristocrats, Eugene Onegin, Will Dare, Dunsey Cass, George Somerset. Hail fellows well met who never got their shit together, and who in their insouciance assumed the sweat and staleness that seemed always to cling to my father and made him sensationally alive. Lean, jokey, boyish, a 30-year-old man already on the dwindling edge of his options, who left no deal undealt, and who, some nights, stretched out to me, 2 fists, knuckles up, ready to be wrapped. I tapped one, and slowly, so slowly it was showmanship, he spread his fingers, my prize, on the palm. I always knew where, always guessed right. He'd shake his head at the fluke, tip a wink at my second sight, my mind's eye, my 6th sense. Then, suddenly grim-faced, apologetic, went to face my mother in the kitchen. My mother, who always seemed to draw the short straw, always found herself on the wrong end of every risk, tetchy and resentful, glum, bombshell of her courtship, now counting out the chores, who never read Chopin, Woolf, Plath, or Rich, never summoned the second sex as witness to self-deceptions about the life she was lent, this marriage that ran riot over common sense. A still young wife, now yelling at a boy husband who waited until he had had enough, waited, that is, until she started to sob, and left that room unfussed, ultimately unrepentant, heartthrob with his umpteenth cigarette, quarter-inch stubble, coat collar flipped up, the great illusionist in full regalia. But what did I know? Those seemed to me his finest hours. Of course, I grew up, saw the light, adjusted my sight to the person he was, a smirking Peter Pan rigged on the stage wire of his own self-love. But the upshot is how he had me convinced his 2-fist Monty was a trial of sorts, a test, that my luck would make good on its promise, that all I deserved would take root, bear fruit, and I would never use up what my life would yield. I believed it. But as I learned from Chekhov, like luck's real work at times, shutting illusions off. Yesterday, I watched a young man kneel down to a girl bawling in the street. He reached behind his back, this after years of saying my father loved me the only way he knew best, and I saw 2 treats, one inside each palm, which he held out in fists. Of course, she was dead on, stopped crying, amazed her choice once again was true and real and right. I once had a story to tell, a sad one, about a father and the family he never worked for, cared for, spared much thought for, a hard luck have-not waiting for a huge payout that was never in the cards. But now I think of the luck that brought you to me, and I thank a luck that flowed from yellow fingers, a luck that had a cigarette smell, casual shoulders, a luck that drained the years of the wife it touched, left her sitting with pursed lips and crossed arms, a luck that began at 3, with a man with no luck, who, wit of the debtor, humor of the cleaned out, knelt before his son with 2 sweet, perfect bets. Thank you. This is to the couple who live above us. They're francophone, they're not poetry readers. So I'm lucky that way. And they keep our imaginations alive. We don't know what they do up there, really. But this is what I think they do up there. To the couple in apartment 949. Stair stompers, all our furniture draggers. Hear me out. What did we do to deserve you? Who kill time by killing peace and quiet, who keep your shoes on and sound like a mob? Seriously, Jen says, looks up at the ceiling, delivering the thump of 2 drunks taking a tumble. It's no laughing matter, this spigot of noise left on and flooding our flat. We've learned to play by ear. Bonks, conks, and crashes, bashes, rattles, and clanks. Never sleeping, you keep us awake. Bipedals running roughshod. Soon enough, you'll huff and puff and plod this house down. we've abandoned all hope. Our walls a boombox for the pots and pans we yearn to brain you with. Knock on wood. Scottish poet I know, Robin Robertson, does something which I think is quite gentlemanly at his readings. He gives his audience a 3-poem warning. So this is your 3-poem warning. And I'm going to read the last 3 poems from the series at the end of the book called The Strangest Things. And it's taken from a line by William Carlos Williams in his book Cora in Hell. And the line is, one has emotions about the strangest things. The idea for the series, because I should explain this briefly, is that I wanted to sort of track all the moments, all my moments of unaccountable sadness. Meaning that all those moments when sort of, you feel yourself sort of welling up, or with melancholy or depression at something. I mean, you feel like as though you've been brushed by something, but you don't know what it is. And those sorts of moods come upon me quite rapidly. It's not something I can actually prepare for, and they leave quite rapidly as well. And so I thought that for this poem, what I would do is, whenever those, I would have to watch myself, and whenever those moments occurred, I would sort of look around me to see if there were a trigger, what the trigger would be, and then sort of let that object speak. So this is what I did, and this is the poem, the series that I wrote. So this is called Abandoned Fence Post, North Hatley. Wasn't always like this. My friends and I could slice up a day, wired. But that's as far back as I go. Break down, set me straight, without regret or concerns about small gestures of repair. Greatest surprise came from how little I could live on. Watched my hopes shrink, unspent. At first I ran myself into the ground, trying to make sense of it, until stumped, I reappreciated solitude. Better off alone. I go about my business. What that means is more than I care to say. Mostly I keep great conclusions at bay. Stick with small answers. I know where I am with that sort of thing. Look at me when I talk to you. This is Puddle Corner, Jantalon, and Outremont. When I was told the secret to success was finding ways to include more and leave out less, I began putting a bit aside, penny pinching until the penny dropped, and I thought, who am I kidding? Tall tales swallowed at face value left me with the buzz of being briefly on top. And now, phony, that's how I feel. A poor man's arriviste. So what would it take to make you happy? You know full well. The last poem is Smell of Something Bad, Kitchen. Actually, that should have been edited. That should be Bad Smell, Kitchen. Sorry about that. No? Really? Yeah. Okay. Smell of something bad, kitchen. Like any homebody, I tread among the odds and ends of daily subtractions. What to make of a diminished thing is anybody's guess. I have enough to be going on with without needing to put on airs. I'd suggest you put me out of mind, but know too well how the barely noticed, once spoken, becomes the unwelcome detail you can't ignore. I'm a nuisance even to myself, who once felt unexpressed, and now wish I could think about something else besides how I give myself away as I grow old, as my insides break up and strew, laid open to whatever turnabout wind throws you off the trail. Many things left to themselves take care of themselves, not me. The little I have, I leave behind to be found. Lie low, shed everything for the lesson of seeing it go. and so, and so. Thank you. I'm told there's a stay up here for questions.
Yes. Does anyone have a question for
Yes.
Carmine?
What do you have to say about the wife who puts up with all this?
Oh. You know, Nureyev was once asked whether being an artist was hard work, and he said, no, being an artist is great work. It's fun. It's hard work for everyone around me. I think that sort of pretty much sums up, I think, the difficulties of living with, you know, someone who's as absent-minded and work-prone as I am. Yeah. But you'd have to ask her. But I spent a great part of my life apologizing. So, you know, hopefully I can be spared that right now.
Do you write more often with a paper or a computer?
Both, actually. I have a pad beside my computer, and I write things down quickly. I think for me, when ideas come, it's better if I write them down. I can write down more quickly than I can type, and I find the act of writing things down preserves the initial buzz of the inspiration. You know, so if I have an idea for something and I write it down quickly enough, I find I can return to it and the fire is still there, still lit. I find that if I do that on a computer, if I go back to it, I find the fire's out. So, I have a pad beside me, and I'm always writing stuff down as I'm working. But invariably, at some point, early in the game, you know, I use the computer. Yeah.
I love the ironing poem, because I find for myself, do you, that these repetitive sort of physical actions, ironing, bicycling, playing piano, maybe these for me produce the first line of the poem.
Well, I love that you're actually comparing ironing to playing the piano, which is great.
She didn't say playing the piano well, Carmine.
No, she didn't. She did say play the piano. You know, I never said I can iron either. So, yeah, no, I mean,
How do you know? No, I don't play well.
No, actually, I think what I appreciate in sort of an ironing. And in fact, someone sent me a link recently that there is some sort of ironing is now an extreme sport. So I don't practice it that way, but I mean I think it's the precision of it, you know.
Yeah, and maybe your mind is drifting.
That's right. Yeah, that
into
you're so focused
into a physical thing.
Yeah.
A rhythmic.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, I think you can't be distracted when you're ironing.
No.
So and so the focus and the sort of the, you know, even, but I guess it's the stationary or grounded physicality of it. You're in place doing the same thing. You know. Yeah. I mean, I enjoy all of it. Yeah. And of course, getting something that's well pressed. Not bad out of it, I guess. But you know, I have a friend, his name is Joe Fiorito, and I thought this was like so amazing that he would, you know, ironing isn't this way for him, this way for me, but for him it's a whole ritual. I never knew, he's such a, Joe Fiorito, he writes columns now for, he's a columnist for the National Post, or Toronto Star rather, for the Toronto Star. But I knew him when he was living in Montreal, and he's I don't know if you ever met him, but he's a real tough guy. I mean, he's just, you know, shoulders back, and you know, sort of a older generation sort of Italian, really, you know, straight back kind of guy. And you know, when I found out he ironed, it kind of blew me over. I never thought that he would do that. But he says, "Oh yeah, I prepare a little tumbler of whiskey, and I strip down to my t-shirt. You know, I dim the lights, and I iron my white shirts." And I have to say, it's the most cleanest, most well-pressed white shirts I've ever seen.
Ian is an expert ironer.
There you go. Now see, look at that. We're growing. Or at least we're all out there, and we have to come out. We're already out there. There's another question?
Yeah. Do you have a practice? Do you have a daily writing practice, or is it as in
I earn a living as an editor, mostly freelance.
Yeah.
So that takes up most of my day.
Right.
Yeah, and the poetry happens either early in the morning or late. We have a 16-month-old, 17-month-old now, and so a lot of the poetry happens late at night when everyone's asleep. But I have no practice. I'm more of a binge writer.
Yeah.
I mean, when I find when the poems are coming, they come fast. But no, not a practice per se. No. Yeah. Yeah.
I found your poem about your father most moving. Your picture on Facebook. I assume that's your child.
It is, yeah.
Okay, so you are a new father.
Yeah.
Perhaps you can spill your guts on fatherhood for us.
No.
Will you have a treat in both hands?
Sorry?
Will you have a treat in both hands?
What was it?
Will you have a treat in both hands for you?
Yes. Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. Both hands. Yeah. Absolutely. No. I mean the only ideas I have about, or the thinking about fatherhood that I do really is comparing what's happening, what I do with Luca, my son, with what my father did with me, and so and I'm always struck by the differences. My father never held us, never picked me up. Of course, I only found this out later, but never played with us. Rarely played with us. That never left. I have to say, I'm not scarred by that at all. I mean, I remember my childhood as a happy one. But I do know. I mean, I can remember his absence. I mean, I know that he was not around a lot, and I'm around all the time with Luca, and I pick him up all the time. And so, I think that so what I'm struck by is sort of the generational. And so just to backtrack, I've spoken to a lot of people who've had the same experience with their fathers, they were never picked up, never played with, really, and a lot of these men were working sometimes 2 jobs, so particularly in my neighborhood. So fathering meant earning a living. It didn't mean sort of playing toys with playing with your kid. It meant feeding him, putting a roof over his head. And so I'm just left to wonder about I often wonder about the generational transition, that change between sort of the more maternal sort of aspects, or that are sort of that have drifted, that are being expressed in my fathering, and wondering what effect that will have on Luca. I mean, I didn't have any of it, and I came out of it pretty okay, and thinking I was pretty happy. He's probably years and years hence will complain about me and how smothering I was and how I couldn't leave him alone. I mean, I don't know, but I do think about. I mean, so those are the sorts of things I'm struck by, which is how. And now my father, a grandfather, picks up Luca all the time, and has discovered has had a second wind as a father, which I find quite moving. And in many ways, he's more of a father to his grandson than he ever was to me in that sort of respect. So those ironies I find the ones that I'm struck by. Yeah. But as to whether I have any advice, or I don't. No. I'm going to run. Okay, thanks.